Thanks for downloading this episode from Teachers Talk Radio. You can find the full schedule and listen back to all our shows at ttradio.org. Enjoy the podcast.
This programme has been brought to you by the Happy Confident Company. Our clinically approved, ready-to-go wellbeing and mental health programme will help your pupils thrive. In only 10 minutes a day, you'll be able to deliver social and emotional learning and wellbeing tools throughout your school. To find out more, visit us at www.happyconfident.com.
It's time for a fresh start to language learning. Pearson Edexcel's new student-centred French, German and Spanish 2024 GCSEs cater to the needs of all learners, regardless of their background, ability or reason for studying. Rooted in learned language knowledge, their assessments are transparent and accessible, allowing all students to showcase their language skills. Through inclusive and relatable content, the new Pearson Edexcel MFL GCSEs build a shared cultural capital that helps students develop an understanding of and appreciation for the wider world. Find out more at go.pearson.com/MFL GCSE 24.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Teachers Talk Radio. Thank you very much for joining us for tonight's conversation, which is all about Labour's new education policies. If you've clicked the little play icon on the listen back, then thank you and welcome. Welcome to those who've already jumped in, Paul and Paul. Two listeners already in the live. Welcome to you. I've got a really nice panel of really interesting contributors and guests for this discussion tonight. I've got Marie Williams, who is already here, which is really great to see, who is Deputy Head and History teacher, and also is sort of invested in Labour because she was a Labour Party member and stood for Parliament for Labour in 2015. So we'll be speaking to Marie later on in a little bit. I've also got Jamie, who is joining us, who is an NEU rep, but also a Labour councillor. So again, it will be really interesting to hear from him around his views on Labour's education policies that have been announced so far. And at about 8:15, Adam Boxer will also be joining us to throw his two pennies into the conversation. So yeah, it's going to be a really sort of interesting conversation, and we're going to be running through all the policies, or as many of the policies as we can. It was quite a detailed document that Labour released sort of 4 days ago, called 5 Missions for a Better Britain. And it was, I don't know, about 20 pages long. So obviously 23 pages to be precise. So I'm very much breaking down the policy. We're not going to cover everything in 90 minutes, but we're gonna cover as much as we possibly can. So I think that now would be, or just before I do introduce my guests, a massive shout out to our sponsors on the show. Soon you'll be able to see them pinned into the space as well. They are the Happy Confident Company, who provide clinically approved wellbeing programs that you can use in your classroom or in your school. We at Teachers Talk Radio highly recommend checking out the Happy Confident Company. Many of our hosts have done so. They've only had really good feedback to give. It's well worth checking out, and it's all about innovative approaches to improving student wellbeing. That's how I see it anyway. I hope they'd agree with that. And also our other sponsor is Pearson MFL. And if you are interested in more modern foreign languages, then we've got 2 shows from Pearson MFL on the website at the moment that are really, really good, looking at the culture divide and cultural capital divide in language learning, and also the relevance of language learning. And we've got our 3rd in the series coming up tomorrow night, live on Spaces at 7:30 p.m, which is all about languages beyond the classroom. So if you're interested in any of those and listening back, please visit the TTR website and have a listen yourself to those. Hosted by Darren Lester. Really, really good sort of discussions. So let's introduce the guests. Marie, do you want to unmute yourself and say hi? We'll just check we can hear you first.
Hello, yeah, it's Mary.
Mary, thank you.
No problem. Nice to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Wonderful. Can you very briefly introduce yourself?
So my name's Mary Williams, and I'm a deputy head in a secondary school in North London. And as you said earlier, I had a little break in my teaching career when I stood for Parliament. So I was a candidate for 2 years in Cardiff North, which is where I'm from, and it was a marginal seat. And I fought the election in 2015 and lost, and the Conservatives got in Cardiff North, although
Oh no, Marie.
now it is a Labour seat. So so it was a good experience, and one that I talk about quite a lot with students.
Wow. So, I mean, this seems like an obvious question, but you must have been completely gutted after 2 years of work, like leading up to that.
Yeah, I would say gutted was a good description of how I felt, and it was an extremely close seat. So previously, the former MP who had been Julie Morgan, she'd lost by 194 votes. So everybody was like, "Oh, it's going to be fine. You're going to get in," but that wasn't the case. So, but nonetheless, I did take a lot from it. It was an amazing experience. And because it was a marginal, it was a really high profile campaign. I really enjoyed the campaigning. I learned lots. I felt like we did have an impact in those 2 years. And some of the campaigns that I led on, had an impact in Cardiff in the longer term, stuff around cycling, the Green Belt. So, yeah, still pleased that I did that for those 2 years.
Fantastic. And then you presumably decided to go back into teaching at the end of those two, because you took the break from teaching for those 2 years to stand as to be a Labour MP, and then presumably you went back in at the end of those 2 years. Was that in a different school, or did your school hold your job for you?
Yeah, no, my school did. So it probably helps to go back a little bit. So in 2012, I decided to leave my job as a deputy head in a school in Hackney to cycle around the world for a year.
Wow.
I didn't cycle around the whole world, but I did cycle across the United States, and my friends are very bored of me mentioning that. But
wow, no, I'm not. That's great.
That's good. And as a result, kind of later on in the trip, when I'd cycled in Australia and New Zealand, and I was was kind of further around in India, and I heard that Cardiff North was looking for their next parliamentary candidate. And so that's how I ended up going back home, because actually, and it will be interesting to hear later from your other guest, who's also a councillor, I know, to stand to try and get selected is, it takes a lot of time. And if your job is a kind of full-time teaching type job, then that would have been really hard to do. But because I wasn't teaching, to campaign to get selected was much more possible. So that's kind of how I got selected. So then I was a candidate for 2 years, and it got really involved in, as I said, local campaigning, saving bus routes in Cardiff, setting up Cardiff Cycling City with other keen people on who cycle, campaigning on stuff around energy prices, and then and then lost. And then in answer to your question, so then I just looked for a job at a similar level that I'd left at, and I got a fairly last minute deputy head job in Wembley. So yes, it was there was definitely some kind of risks over employment there.
Wow. Well, listen, I mean, later on I might be asking you, because I know Jamie's got to go at 8ish, so I might be asking you after 8ish a little bit more about that, because it's really interesting. Before I introduce Jamie, Khalil's here. I'm giving a special shout out to Khalil, a Teachers Talk Radio legend, long time presenter, great guy. It's great to see you, Khalil. I hope you're well, mate. It's great to see you here. So definitely check in later. You've always got good things to say, so definitely consider checking in later if you hear anything relevant. Right, Jamie, are you there?
Yep, I'm here.
Right, do you want to introduce yourself to everybody.
Thanks very much. So yeah, as you mentioned before, I'm a councillor down in Dover District Council. I'm deputy leader of the council actually. So we've just won enough seats to take the council from the Tories for the first time in about 20 years, I think, which was absolutely amazing. So there's a few councils now down in this area that are Labour led, which is brilliant for us. I'm a physics teacher as well in Dover, so the question that most people have been asking me recently is how do I manage to do all of those things
that was
at the
going to
same
be my
time?
first question, Jamie.
I assumed, and I think that's what Mary was getting at as well. I also just, to put it out there so everyone's clear, because I like to be transparent about these things, I do work for the NEU as well. So I'm a local officer for the NEU. So I do 2 days a week for the NEU, and I do 2 days a week teaching, which does give me a little bit of flexibility, I suppose. Where
and then a day, what about the fifth day?
A day where I don't work because I have my daughter on that day, who you can probably see in my little picture there, Matilda.
So where does the Labour councillor stuff come in then?
So essentially, I have to try and squeeze it in at some point during those times. Obviously, while I'm teaching, it's obviously very limited because I'm in the classroom teaching. But the NEU work is quite flexible. Supporting teachers and things like that is often done kind of in the evenings, kind of done at times that suit teachers, and so that does sometimes leave me a bit of time. And so I have to try and juggle a diary of trying to run a council and support teachers, which is good actually. It leaves me time to plan my own diary essentially. When we talk about recruitment and retention issues in education, I think one of the big issues is that, like many sectors, you can be flexible. In education, you possibly can't. And so where I work for the NEU, I can be a bit more flexible, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting because presumably, what is the next step from councillor? Is that MP?
I mean, I don't know. Maybe I'm quite happy as I am at the moment. This is fairly new to me. So being deputy leader as well as a first-time councillor is quite a big step, I suppose. And so for the time being, I'm good as I am. I mean, if I could be an MP, I think that'd be great, because I think we could do with some certainly younger people, certainly people with slightly different backgrounds. Actually having worked in schools, having done work where you actually feel the effects of the decisions that are made higher up. Whoever's in government. If you've never done those jobs, you kind of think making those decisions and it's never affected you. You wonder, how much time and effort is being put into them. So, I mean, I'd love to if I had the opportunity.
Right, Jamie, because I know I've only got you for sort of 20-25 minutes, so I wanna really start digging into the Labour policies, because you and Anne-Marie are obviously both very much sort of Labour members and invested in Labour. So I just want to start with a very broad question. How do you feel about the latest raft of Labour education policy announcement? Are you generally happy? I mean, how do you feel about it?
Yeah, I mean, obviously I've read through this 23-page document. I'm guessing most people are probably not going to do that, and did listen to Keir Starmer's speech. I think whatever you think about Labour at this point in time, I think there are definitely some positives in here. I think it's always going to get criticised as a document of, there's lots of grand ideas, but not much kind of substance to it. I think that's typical of a political policy or a political document, I suppose, when there's no election coming up. I was thinking this morning about, the stuff I was producing for our local elections. We said things like we're going to produce 200 council houses per year. We've never told anyone exactly how we're going to do that. We just kind of make that promise. And so I think there's some quite big kind of claims in here that they're going to do that I think are definite positives. So things like early years, the fact that they're going to put a bit more focus, a bit more emphasis on that, I think is a definite positive. If you get kids really early on and you can develop them early on, if you can put funding in, you can have a good quality workforce early on. I think that's definitely a positive. So I'm quite happy that that's in there. They talk about delivering childcare places. I know childcare early years isn't just about childcare. They talk about that in this policy, and so I'm grateful of that. But if there aren't spaces for children in these nurseries in early years, then that does put a strain on the economy. So there is a wider issue to this, and I think that's kind of pointed out in this policy, that education and the wider economy kind of come hand in hand. So I think that's quite important, that they start with security. People having homes, people having breakfast, people being able to afford basics, people being able to work means that kids are happier as a whole. So I think that's a positive. I think most people probably winced slightly when they talked about a broader education, because more tinkering of curriculum or curricula, I should say, probably makes people squirm a little bit, as it did me. But I think actually when you read down into it, it's more about not narrowing the curriculum as maybe some of the kind of the matrices that we use now, the way that we look at schools and the way that we measure them forces us to narrow. So I think it's just widening that back out, as opposed to trying to stuff the curriculum full of bits and pieces. But then I do worry, I teach physics. We struggle to cover the content anyway, and I worry if you're going to try and fill the curriculum time with loads of other stuff like oracy and like wider subjects, that we are going to run out of time in the curricula. So something's going to have to give at some point. But this is talking about curricular and assessment review. So I'd like to think that there's an opportunity for teachers to have an input in there. So I think there are some really big positives. There are some bits that I'd really like to see some more detail.
Jamie, I want to ask you, because I want to start digging into these sort of policies, because we in some areas we do have some detail, we have some sort of specifics. So the first one I wanted to talk to you about, very well publicised one, which is the idea of paying £2,400 to teachers after 2 years. Do you think this is a good idea?
Well, as I started with, the fact that an NEU activist and an officer, absolutely paying any teachers any more money is great in my book. But I think, going back a few years, we've had bursaries for teachers joining the profession. When I joined, I got a fairly sizable bursary for being a physics teacher. And if you've been in those shortage subjects, you could well have got those bursaries. Has it actually helped people stay in the profession? Well, no, is the answer, isn't it, really? So have they helped? Well, not necessarily. This policy kind of goes along and says, well, we would look at redressing that. I think they say that we spend something like £181 million on bursaries, and they would look at kind of spreading them out a little bit and looking at specific geographical areas. So if an area needs more teachers, could we put that money there? So I think that's a better way of doing it. Or looking at specific subjects this year that are a shortage, should we put the money in there? But I still think, they're proposing this £2,400 after 2 years. Does that still keep people in education? Is a 5-year marker a better time? But then you could push it back to 10 years, and then I don't know if there's ever a good time of just giving someone a one-off lump sum to keep them in education. Should we actually be talking about the things that actually push people out, or the things that put people off? I alluded to it at the start.
Let me throw sort of a spanner at you there, Jamie, on that one. I mean, they've said this policy, the £2,400 after 2 years policy, will cost £50 million, which sounds about right. Now, that's quite a hefty sum of money. And, there's not unlimited amounts of money. There can't be, whatever government is in office, there can't just be an unlimited stream. So therefore, it's sort of, the critics would say, it's very easy to say, oh yeah, let's do this, but let's also do this and this and this and this. Yeah. If the £2,400 is a priority, which obviously is, because they talked about it within this raft of initial policy announcements, then we do have to sort of put that against other things that money could be spent on. So,
but I think I think the point is if you keep those people in, and I'm a big advocate for retaining, quality teachers. This year we saw 40,000 teachers quit. That was without those that retire. That's 9% of the profession. You've got to retrain them or train more people, and that's costly. So although there's a cost to paying out that 2,400 to people in their second year, there's still a cost in trying to recruit. They also say in this document they want to recruit 6,500 new teachers. If we kept those quality teachers who've got a couple of years experience, ultimately that would be cheaper, in the long run, wouldn't it? So from my point of view, it's spending money now that in the future then doesn't need to be spent, because you keep those people in education, you can kind of start, winding down on the numbers that you've got to recruit, because trying to recruit that number of teachers when we struggle at the moment is going to be difficult for whoever's in power.
But for example, I mean, one option might be to invest that money into more PPA, more free periods for teachers and on their standard timetables, because in a and also I suppose you've got the issue that there's that alternative, but you've also got the issue of that. Is there then an issue of, well, hang on a minute, what about the experienced teachers? With the attrition on experienced teachers is just as bad as on younger teachers or newer teachers, but actually, the provision is just for the new teachers.
And this was my point at the start, I suppose, that actually where I do kind of half my time teaching and half my time doing union work, I can be more flexible. If you teach full time, you don't have that flexibility. Well, that's something that education doesn't have over many other professions. So, if that's something you want from your working, being given £2,400 kind of is irrelevant for lots of people then, isn't it? They see their mates working in professions where they can work from home, they can go in the office once a week. That might be what's driving them out. Yeah, and so actually
that's where I was bringing in the PPA angle, because that would potentially provide a little bit more flexibility, especially if you were allowed to be off-site during those free periods of PPAs. Maybe that would give a little bit more of that flexibility to more staff.
The first school that I taught at, we had 20% PPA as a standard because they budgeted for everyone to have that.
Yeah.
And you wouldn't believe the effect that had on my workload. I could essentially get the vast majority of my work done in my school day. And then you could leave with the kids at 3:00 if that's what the Daily Mail wants you to believe, and you almost could, because you'd pretty much done everything, because you had twice the amount of PPA time. You could actually be responsive to what's happening in your classroom. I know secondary school. I'm talking about secondary school. I know primary schools do their PPA slightly different because you normally have it in a bulk, but it allowed me to pretty much have a PPA every day. And so you could quickly mark some stuff that kids had done, a test that day, and give it back to them the next day. And it was so much better. And so actually, would teachers prefer that? I think they probably would, rather than a £2,400. I noticed someone saying they've worked for 16 years. Would they get it? Well, exactly. Where do you draw the line then and say these people are going to get that money? Are we saying that we definitely want those 2-year teachers, but we're not really that fussed once you reach 5 or 10 years? Who are the people training up those early career teachers? They're the ones that get lumped with extra workload. Should we be actually giving them a pay amount? So,
and also, I suppose you've got the issue of how much difference pay rises in general and sort of retention bonuses. I mean, I know Labour have said, the research says that they do make a difference, and and that across the board. But within teaching, I'm just not convinced that is going to make a key difference. And I do feel, as you've just said, that if you were to balance that against one or two other options for £50 million, that maybe you'd see bigger results. But
I mean, the union was, the NEU was offered what they were offered very recently, the 4.5% with £1,000 one-off payment, and it was overwhelmingly rejected. So do teachers want a one-off payment? Well, very recently they said no. Because
there was a 1,000 within that. That offer.
So I mean, would I say no to a £2,400 payment? Well, no, but it's not going to be for everyone. It's for a select few, essentially. Does it tackle workload? Does it stop people working silly hours a week? No. Does it allow them to do their job in a reasonable time? No. I'd actually prefer that they really look at workload. I mean, they do talk about it in this document, how they're going to retain excellent teachers and leaders. And actually, I'm again pleased that Labour are acknowledging that this isn't just a teaching issue. This is an issue for support staff, because a lot of support staff could go and work in retail and earn more money and have a better quality of life. So it's an issue for support staff too. That we're struggling to recruit head teachers. When they work on average 56 hours, a week, there's no, you can see why lots of head teachers are saying, what, I can do something less stressful elsewhere. And so I'm not completely convinced that just, for second year teachers, that payment is going to do a huge amount to sort out recruitment and retention.
Do you think so? For example, there would be sort of critics who would say it's all well and good to say, recruitment and retention is the number one thing on the agenda, but unless you've got actionable, proper policies behind that will actually do something about that, then it is just all talk. That's what the critics would say.
Yeah, I don't think there's one thing that's going to solve the issues in education. Because I think, go ahead and give teachers a 20% pay rise or a 50% pay rise. All of a sudden, you've got loads of teachers. Would that solve the crisis? Well, not necessarily. If you went ahead and made it so that everyone had 20% and workload was manageable, would you solve the crisis? I think you've got to do both of those things. I still wholeheartedly believe that retention should be the main focus and not recruitment, because I think once you've got people in that want to be a teacher, you should be able to keep them in, shouldn't you? You've gone, you've bothered to train, you've said you want to do this, you've gone through all that effort, you've got yourself a job, and then for 40,000 people to walk away, I think is absolutely insane. That's a huge number of people that you've now got to recruit, that you just needed to keep them in if you made it a nice job to do. And I also think I've worked in a school where we've been so short on teachers that massively affects the workload of everyone else. And so even if that school gave everyone 20% PPA, you'd end up spending your whole time doing cover for the teachers that they didn't have. And so you can't just solve one of those issues in isolation. You've got to do something really meaningful on both. And so, talking about, revising the delivery of the early career framework, I know a lot of teachers that say that they're having to mentor ECTs, and they just don't have the time, or they haven't been given the training, and it's almost just a tick box exercise. And then in my role as an NEU caseworker, we're seeing loads and loads of ECTs struggling or being told they're failing just because they haven't had the input that they should have had. And so, there's not the people there to support the new teachers coming in. There's not the time for them to spend with the new ECTs. And so it goes round and round in circles, doesn't it? You need the time in schools. You need the staff in schools.
Just give a shout out to everyone listening live. Rory, Guy, Peter, Sam, Georgia, Paul, Jen, Shanna, hope I've pronounced that correctly, Paul, Hannah, Nathan, Phil, and obviously we've got Marie. Marie, I want to ask you now about this £2,400 thing after 2 years. What do you think about it?
So I became a teacher back in 1999, and part of the thing that not convinced me, but kind of nudged me into, yes, I'm going to do this, was that then if you did a PGCE, you got paid to do the PGCE. I think it was £6,000. And obviously that's not what Labour are promising for this election. But I think also at the time there were golden hellos for different shortage subjects, for teaching in different areas, recruitment and retention points. And so I think those things do make a difference. And if people are, if the stats show that people are dropping out before they finish, and actually if you finish those first crucial years, then you're more likely to stay in than just having a payment that is just an incentive to keep you in the profession for that time. Obviously, it doesn't help to keep people in for 5 and 10 years, and I know there are dropout rates at 5 years, but I think it's good to have that. And I think my favourite line in the whole document was that it was about re-establishing teaching as a profession that is respected and valued as a skilled job which delivers for children and our country. And I think if I reflect back on teaching, how it feels now to how it felt in kind of 2003, is that it feels like it doesn't have as much respect. And part of that is because it's tougher and tougher. And as there is a shortage of teachers, so as Jamie was saying, the job gets harder for other people, and then less people want to join. And I don't think all the policies that are put out are going to solve everything, but at least they are understanding the problem and would be taking education in the right direction.
Marie, I'll come back to you in a second because I want to sort of move on now. I know Jamie's got to go soon. So, Jamie, I want to ask you about the super teachers. That wasn't a sound effect. That was me. But the super teachers, these are, for anybody listening, this is Labour's plan to launch school improvement teams into so-called, in inverted commas, struggling schools to in inverted commas, and I'm putting these inverted commas in the statement in, save them. The super teachers. What is your view, Jamie, on the super teachers idea? Is that me who's gone, or is that Jamie?
Oh, hello.
Hello, Jamie. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I realised I have a limit on my social media, and it just chucked me out.
Okay, no problem. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you fine.
So what is your thoughts on super teachers?
I mean, I'm all for the way that they're proposing reforming Ofsted, because again, this is an NEU thing that we've been banging on about, because I think, again, one of the big stresses is that not necessarily Ofsted, but the way that schools react to, Ofsted want this and we've got to do this for Ofsted. And I think a lot of the time we make a rod for our own backs by, we've got to do this for Ofsted, when actually that's not necessarily what they want at all. I think anything that is proposing support for schools, I think on the whole, I would probably agree with. I think coining it though as these super teachers, I think might be a little bit patronising to those of us who are probably quite capable of just getting on and teaching just fine. You often find, absolutely excellent teachers in all different types of schools, whatever their rating is, whether they're, considered outstanding or whether they're considered to be inadequate. And so I think, yes, supporting schools and helping them would be great. I mean, similar to maybe what local authorities used to do back in the day. Lots of schools will have a school improvement partner that works with them, like a critical friend. I suppose, again, it's one of these ones where looking at the detail is going to be the key. These teams, coordinated by civil servants, will offer school support, drawing on the expertise of teachers and leaders across the education system. Well, again, what might work well in one school might not work well in the next one. So do we want someone coming in and kind of imposing something on your school? Are civil servants necessarily the best ones to be telling a school or teachers in a school what to do? I don't know. But again, I think the detail is going to be important. Support, help and guidance, I think it would be helpful.
What do you think of the argument, Jamie, that academies and trusts already provide that? you know, there is that argument out there that, hang on a minute, and this has come from the CST, actually, the Confederation School Trust. They've basically said, you know, we as trust already do this.
I mean, I think there may be trusts that do that. I think a lot of trusts probably think that they do that, and they don't necessarily do that. Again, I work across a whole range of schools, you know, independent schools, LA schools, big academy trusts, small academy trusts, and it kind of tends to be the big academy trusts where you get a lot of kind of one size fits all policies that one school does and then they impose it onto others. There's not a huge amount of support necessarily that goes along. It's more of a, these are the policies we want you to follow. We want you to have these set PowerPoints up on the screen. We want you to use these set phrases, and you just have to use them. And the support aspects maybe isn't quite there. I think some smaller academies most likely do that, because I worked in a much smaller academy that supported a number of very local schools, and there was a lot more support. You know, a Senko in one school helped train up a Senko in the next school, for example, or, you know, an assistant head swapped schools so that they could work under a very experienced head teacher and train them up before they moved back to their previous school. So there are some academies that do that. Yeah, so I'm not gonna disagree with that completely, but I know that there are some, you know, very large multi-academy chains across, like, nationally that maybe they think that they do that, but I imagine the people in the schools probably don't agree.
Marie, what are your thoughts on the super teachers?
So it's Mary, but
Mary, sorry.
That's all right. If I don't say it now, it'll just carry on.
Drag on.
So they talk about, as Jamie was saying, a set of regional improvement teams, and I know the press have picked it up as using different language, and I think Jamie's right that schools always need school support, and it talks about all schools focusing on school improvement, which I think is right. I agree that some trusts are very good at doing this, but not every school is in a big trust. A lot of schools are in actually very small trusts, single academy trusts, or a few schools, and actually to have those links is really important to have them organized, because otherwise you end up with schools that are being left out. I was at a session at the Festival Education last week, and, you know, everybody on the panel agreed you've got to do this in schools, and this to me is just a sensible way of systematizing it, so that you don't just have the regional commissioner trying to be in charge of something which they're not actually doing and leaving it to the trusts. So
Mary, just to be clear, are you sort of generally pro the idea of this?
Of having people, well, as Jamie said, it exists already. As schools have a school improvement partner. It happens in local authority schools. It happens within trusts. So I think this is just making sure that every school has good links and has good people to work with, and that those improvement teams are appointed on a regional basis, so they have a kind of overview, which I think we've been missing a bit in the last few years.
I mean,
Tom, can I just jump in? I think what we'd be, I'm not trying to be negative about all of this at all, because I do think it is useful. You know, a bit like most teachers, you know, had a mentor at the beginning of their career, and probably do then have a head of department they go to, or there's a teacher that they will work with just naturally. A lot of people will form kind of their own network of who they will go to. You know, as a physics teacher, typically it will be within my science department, but often I like to go and seek out someone slightly further afield. But that's mostly who I seek out, or who I quite like how so-and-so teaches, so I'm going to go and kind of talk to them. I don't know how you know, how well it would work if it's going to be kind of imposed on, and I think that's what often happens in some big trusts. Well, you're in a trust with these schools and they're close to you, so you've got to work with them. But hang on, those schools are nothing like me, or they're on a completely different path to me, and so it as long as there's some sort of, it's collaborative as opposed to
But also
like it's been made in the papers that it's super teachers are coming.
Well, this also
do your
hinges, I guess, and this would be my sort of thing, is this hinges on the idea there are, it's how you
a hierarchy of teachers.
Well, correct, and it's also how you determine that, because if it was on current form, it would be probably a case of, oh right, so and so works in a inverted commas outstanding school that hasn't been inspected for 8 years, and therefore they can go into a school that was that's been inspected 4 times in the last 3 years and been rated it requires improvement, and tell them what to do.
I think
Other than that, it could be based on results, and again, there's flaws in that too. There's many contextual factors to consider when it comes to results on a school and teacher level. This is my sort of thinking here. So that's why I was asking you both, whether you would agree with even the premise behind it, of this idea of, almost how do you determine that?
I mean, I worked in a school that was in special measures in the early 2000s, and there were then school improvement people that came in to help to try and get it out of special measures. That was part of the London Challenge, which was funded by the last Labour government. And London Challenge has actually a really successful reputation for having raised the standards across London schools. And so I think that idea that there is best practice, effective practice that can be identified. If one school is doing it, I think it's wrong to let it just sit there and nobody know about it. So I see it as like a moral obligation. If somebody has a really good way of doing something, then that should be shared so that other people can do it as well. So I think it's less about saying this person is coming to tell you what to do, but more of a model of sharing what works, what's effective. And I think that's been shown to work before.
So back to my original point, that it's the detail that we're waiting on then, I suppose, that is exactly how you're going to do this. Collaborating with other educators on how you can improve. Absolutely, I have no issues with that. As a premise, I suppose, is to answer your question. But if you're having someone forced upon you, telling you how to improve, I don't know if that's necessarily going to help everyone.
I'm going to, in a moment, we're going to move on to oracy, another amazing topic from this programme to discuss. But before I do that, it'd be a good point for me to say thanks everybody who's listening live to this, but also to mention our 2 sponsors on the show tonight, which is the Happy Confident Company and Pearson MFL. The Happy Confident Company provide well-being support to young people in any school. So if you're looking for programs, for example, to run during form time or during particular moments in the day, it can be up to 10 minutes per day with students and staff. Obviously, it's aimed at students. Then the Happy Confident Company is well worth checking out in that regard. And also with Pearson MFL, we've got 3 shows. 2 of them have already taken place. You can find them on the TT Radio website. We've got the last one in the series tomorrow night, looking at addressing the cultural capital in language learning, cultural chasm, in language learning. We've also looked at the relevance of language learning, and tomorrow night is language beyond the classroom. So how do we enthuse students about learning languages beyond what they do in school? So if you're interested in language learning, please tune in and listen back to those, and maybe check it out tomorrow night as well. We've had a few comments during the show. One of them from Paul, who says, I've been a teacher for 16 years. When do I get my £2,400? Paul, it's a quote those on Twitter. Stop being so bitter and twisted about it, mate. Just because you've, not getting the money, Paul, you need to calm down, mate. That's good. We love a laugh emoji. Well done. We've also had a comment from, hang on. These are at the top of the space, by the way. So anybody listening live, you can listen to them. Oh, my phone's just decided it doesn't want to let me read them. Oh, there we go. Mr. Taylor says, surely there's enough ex-teachers out there to staff a school improvement team to help with struggling schools. Is Mr. Taylor being sarcastic? I don't know. Let's get Josh in. Let's see what I think it's Josh. Let's find out what he thinks. And Paul says, I only just worked out how to comment in here. I'm a fellow Labour member and NEU rep. My bright idea is to create public sector creches that are free for teachers and the NHS. Retention problem maybe not solved, but hugely addressed. Well, that's interesting, isn't it? What do you think of that, both of you? Public sector creches.
I mean, I think anything that makes people's lives easier in education, I think, is a good thing. But again, I'm cautious of just treating early years, or the early childhood years as childcare. I think this policy is trying to move away from that, and acknowledge that there's a lot of development to be had there, and that we can narrow the gap early on, and it's good. So if it was a full scale nursery that's doing everything they can, then yeah, I'd be definitely for that.
And Mary, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I agree with Jamie. I think on the other side, on flexible working is going to be really important in teaching. And obviously, as we were talking about earlier, it's in many ways an inflexible job. And I think keeping parents in the workforce and enabling that flexibility is going to be really important to the education system in future.
Let's move on. Jamie, do you need to go, by the way?
Yeah, I was just going to say that, Tom. I'm going to have to
thanks very much for coming on. Really great contributions.
Yeah,
and
thanks very much for inviting me on.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks, guys. Thanks, everyone.
Right, Mary, I want to ask you next about this oracy focus. So Labour have basically said, we want to refocus or give more significant focus onto oracy. What were your thoughts on that particular strand of policy?
Yeah, I mean, this is something that we have focused on in my school, and I think it's a big divider. We were talking about the vocabulary that children have when they're really little makes a big impact, and how people speak makes a big impact when they are adults. And I always think about, if you go to a top private school, I remember a friend of mine from university, he would describe his classes, how they did their reading before the class, and then in the class they would just sit and discuss for the whole lesson. So there was no exercises, there was no exercise books, it was just a discussion, like university. Like some universities have, if they have small groups, which obviously is not so many anymore. So I think building that into our system to recognise that how you speak just makes such a difference, whether it's interviews, whether it's putting a point across in a meeting, whether it's giving a presentation. There are so many ways that oracy is really important. And my other small thought on it is that the word oracy I've only realised quite recently, it's very education specific. A friend of mine who does communications training was like, oracy? What's oracy? So I think there's also going to be a bit of education around the word as well.
But what would you say to those who, there's been various sort of commentary on this. One of the comments, and this is from one of our TTR hosts, Nathan, who's adminning the space today, has said that we're already doing it, particularly at sort of primary level. What would you say to that? Because I mean, would you say that oracy is already embedded within what we're doing?
Again, I think it's probably mixed. I know we are trying to do it and it's something we've done more in my school in the last, say, 5 years. But I definitely get the sense from across different secondary schools in particular that it is varied. So some schools, obviously School 21 is the school that's led lots of work on oracy, and they do lots of different ways of getting children to practice speaking and listening. But I really don't think that we are in state schools at the same level as is common practice in some private schools. And I think it's not about being like private schools, it's about giving children the same opportunities. And I think it's 90% of children in Britain go to state schools, and yet they do not have 90% of the opportunities. So I think that's why oracy is so important, and things that Speakers for Schools, charities like that, I think are really important that schools get involved in.
Mm-hmm. Listen, Labour talks a lot about like teaching skills and more creative subjects getting more attention. What do you think about that? This is sort of moving on, I guess, to curriculum in a sense.
I mean, I was really pleased to see the talk of broader curriculum, specifically music, arts, sports, and drama. And I think that those are subjects that have been slightly sidelined in the last 10 years. And I think it's really important that they're seen as valuable, important, celebrated. So I think that is included in the assessment measures. I think that would be sensible, a creative or a vocational subject. And then on the skills, I'm always so I'm a history teacher, and I've always, the talk about knowledge versus skills, I've always seen as a slightly false dichotomy, because if you're writing a paragraph, you've got to have something to write about. But I do think the world is changing, particularly around digital skills. Somebody who works in the BFI that I know is always talking about that candidates do not have those digital skills for filmmaking and in the using digital means to get their point across. So I think it is important to look at those wider skills as well, but it's also, again, in the detail of what that looks like in the curriculum.
Yeah, I mean, one of the statements in the plan, to quote, says, a curriculum that ensures young people leave school ready for work and life, building knowledge and skills. So there's a couple of things there. I mean, the first one would be the age-old thing of, critics who would say, you don't know the jobs of tomorrow, let alone, the future, especially with how rapidly things are changing. So the idea of getting children ready for work, by the time they fit, like by the time year 7s and 8s are leaving school, that may have changed again in terms of the concept of it. And the other issue, I guess, would be, which you've already mentioned, which is this idea of knowledge versus skills, and the idea that without knowledge you can't do much, and therefore to be creative, for example, you need knowledge. You need domain knowledge to be able to do that. I mean, what would you say to those two sort of things on that?
Yeah,
would you agree with that, or would you be sort of saying, hang on a minute, no, we have gaps in the curriculum?
I suppose my view on the jobs are always changing. So this has been said obviously for a long time, and jobs have changed. But there are some things that people still value. So, for example, having a good qualification in, I use my subject, history, is still valuable and is valued by many different employers, even when your job is nothing to do with that. The other thing, I think it's interesting what's happening at the moment with artificial intelligence and chat GPT, and how, yes, you still need that to get the best out of it. You still need to have excellent knowledge. And I'm pleased that there is talk of those skills, but it's not saying, and we can forget about knowledge, because I think I don't think you can, and it's a false dichotomy.
Mr. Taylor has commented again, is it the job of schools and universities to train people for a job? Surely employers should offer the training for the skills they value. Interesting point there, Josh. But interesting one. Paul, go on.
I was just going to say, on the apprenticeship levy, there's a good point in the document that's about that employers being able to use their apprenticeship levy to train people as well as for apprenticeships. And I think there's a concern, and I've definitely come across this in my work, of not using the whole apprenticeship levy to train apprenticeships. And lots of our students go on to do an apprenticeship, and having that job at the end is, I think, key, and that's what we've got to make sure of in apprenticeships.
Yeah, one of the interesting things in the programme that sort of leads on from that, Labour are also proposing an immediate change to Progress 8 and Attainment 8 to ensure that it always includes a creative or vocational subject. Wow. I mean, that's a really interesting one, isn't it? You know, do you agree with that?
I mean, it is narrow at the moment, Progress 8. So, you know, and there are a lot of vocational and creative subjects. So I still think that gives a lot of scope for children. I think the measure that you use for progress is, you know, it's good that they're having a assessment and curriculum review, because wherever you put the assessment measure, that's inevitably where schools put focus. And so I think it is important that those creative subjects are valued, and they haven't been as valued. And so whether I would hope that technology could be included in that measure, we'll have to wait and see.
Because I noticed Keir Starmer made some commentary as well on like digital literacy. You know, he did say, you know, we sort of need to get a balance between, you know, going back to sort of, you know, rooms full of computers, you know, computer rooms, and then the flip side of like coding, you know, getting all students to code, which, you know, many people would sort of argue is going out the window with AI and sort of, I don't know, the advancements in technology are going ahead of some of the things that are even on the table now. You know, like I mean, when I think about AI, I just think how quickly that landscape is going to change. All, you know, it's just going to change. Like even the people running CPD on AI now in education, it probably in 6 months' time, it's probably going to be laughed out the ballpark by things that are going to come along within that arena, I would suspect. You know, when it comes to all the different learning implications and classroom implications of that.
But I think it goes back to the same point that still to use AI effectively, you have to still have that knowledge, you have to have that understanding, and without it, you actually can't use it properly because you don't know what it's given you back. I heard somebody at the Festival Education talk about, oh well, you know, teacher training, we can get AI to just give feedback to teachers, which I thought was ridiculous, because there is so much, you know, in the human task of teaching that is so complex that it really does take a long time to understand how to help somebody get better and spot the things that they need to do. So I think AI has huge opportunities, but I don't think it'll ever replace the humans in teaching.
Yeah. One of the things sort of that I wanted to ask you as well, Mary, was about the idea of all teachers having to have QTS. So, you know, and one of the things I know that has sort of come about based on that issue, one of the questions was around the teachers who already teach in private schools and academies who don't have QTS and are successfully doing the job already. I mean, do you think this policy of, you know, pushing this idea that all teachers need QTS or whatever, you know, whatever the qualification is, do you think that's a worthwhile thing to sort of push as a priority for Labour?
Definitely. And I think if we're going to re-establish teaching as a profession that is respected and valued as a skilled job, then it's really important that you have a minimum qualification, and qualified teacher status should be that qualification. And it doesn't mean that somebody can't train on the job like they do now when you're on a training course to get that qualification. And I know lots of excellent teachers that have started in that way, or that they've started as a at the beginning of their career, that they've gone straight into the classroom with a Teach First training course over the summer, but they're still working towards that Teach First qualification. And you wouldn't expect in another profession, like in medicine, for example, that you wouldn't have a minimum qualification. And I think children's education is as important as everybody's health. So definitely yes.
Okay, we've got Adam Boxer now. Adam, do you want to unmute yourself? Bottom left. There you go.
Hello, mate.
There you go. How's it going?
I'm doing good. Sorry I couldn't join from the start. How are you?
No problem. Not too bad. Not too bad. Listen, I'll just give you a chance first to introduce yourself to anybody listening back to this as a podcast. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Adam. I'm a science teacher. I teach in North London. I'm also the Education Director of Carousel Learning, an integrated online learning platform that is guaranteed to, I can't remember what the strapline was, guaranteed to increase student outcomes and lower workloads. Boom. And yeah, I also do a bit of writing and stuff.
Okay, well, I wanna ask you all about Labour's latest raft of education policy announcement. So I'm just gonna open it up by asking you what you think in general. If there's anything you want to particularly if you have a particular opinion on in it all.
Tom asking me if I have an opinion on something, brilliant. I think that's a safe bet. Yeah, so I think it's probably quite important to preface all of this with the fact that barring some kind of act of God, plagues and pillars of fire and stuff, I will absolutely 100% be voting Labour at the next election. So I think it's important to state all that everything that I may or may not say is said as a friend, because I do worry sometimes that people tend to take any criticism of Labour as closet Toryism, but that's not what's going on here. Anyway, blah. Let's crack on. This is why I'm not a broadcaster. Right, so I've had like quite a good look at the Labour policy document, and I don't mean the articles that were published about it, but I mean like the actual thing itself.
Yeah,
5 missions. Yeah, so like when it blew up. Yeah, exactly. And when it all blew up, it was, things to do with super teachers and stuff. But like that's actually a really small part of it. And like they don't use those terms at all. And actually out of the whole thing, that's a part of it that I don't think is particularly controversial. It's not crazy. Whatever. Anyway, there's some things that I like, there's some things that I don't like. So I like the way that they are emphasizing knowledge-rich curriculum and they're not just planning on chucking absolutely everything out, because that's one of the things that I think has been good over the last decade or so. I really like the way they are trying to frame it in like the whole beginning bit basically is about how education can't be separated from wider social stuff. And you need to give people adequate housing and healthcare and social care and all that stuff before education actually works, which I think is really important. It's and actually wasn't the tone of like Starmer's speech when people give these speeches and they're like, education has the power to lift you out of poverty, and I'm like, well, it doesn't really. It might lift some people out of poverty, and it might be there are some people without education they would still be in poverty, but like the idea that it would just magically work is totally for the birds and flies in the face of absolute reality. So yeah, I think that's really important. And am I allowed to say Amanda Spielman's name on this podcast? Or does it like automatically get beeped out?
It doesn't. I mean, I can try and shout over you as you say it if you want, but no, we don't. No, you're all good.
Right. Go. Okay. So His Majesty's Chief Inspector of Schools, Amanda Spielman, gave a speech last week at the Festival of Education where she said similar stuff, that like there's a social contract and there's a wider thing at play than just education, which I think is an important framing. And the stuff on Ofsted, well, now that we've mentioned Spielman, the stuff on Ofsted is kind of so-so. For a long time, Ofsted has seen itself as a judgment body and not a school improvement body. I think that's, by the way, something that people don't get. They say, oh, right, well, Ofsted come in and they do their report, whatever, and then they vanish. This is outrageous. Like, where's the support, blah, blah. And they were saying, like, why aren't Ofsted inspectors hanging around and giving more support and teaching people how to do their jobs better and stuff like that? And Ofsted have long maintained that that's not actually their function. That's not their job. That's not what they're told to do by government. And I think that's probably true. Most of the school improvement stuff has been down to either local partners, if you're an LA school, or via the MAT, that kind of stuff.
But they have said, they improve standards, Ofsted.
Correct, but that doesn't mean that they are part of the like in-school boots on the ground improvement thing. The idea of improving standards is if you go into school and say, right, well, you're inadequate, and then you get rebrokered or taken over by a MAT or whatever, that improves the school. So that's the sense in which they're an improvement body, but not in the sense that they'll go in and deliver CPD or coach the head teacher or whatever.
No, I understand, but I mean, they have. No, I get what you're saying. That they on the day-to-day, their actual job, I guess they would say, we're not a school improvement partner, but all I'm saying is they have said we have improved standards in schools, so that suggests that they've had a role in improving standards.
Totally. But I think the way it's done seems like there's an attempt at a pivot in the Labour document. So definitely a shift. It doesn't give detail to that, and it does have more of an appreciation. So it doesn't say anything about the grading system, which is obviously disappointing, because I think pretty much everyone other than Ofsted and the government think that needs to go. So that's definitely something that is a shame isn't in there.
So on Ofsted, which we haven't actually discussed yet, even prior to your arrival, was they said that they were going to remove Ofsted one-word judgments and replace it with in inverted commas scorecards, which would include an annual safeguarding check. So that's sort of what they've said.
Did it say explicitly that they were going to get rid of the one-word judgments?
That's what I've read. Yeah.
Okay. All right. I'm going to have to. All right. Alas, I'm going to chalk it up to sloppy reading by me.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's actually a good thing then. 1 second. I'm just having a quick look because. No, they don't say that.
In that depends which.
In this document, they definitely. In this one, they definitely do not say it. So,
Mary, do you have?
It says. Sorry. I apologise. It says Labour's wider plan to reform Ofsted and replace headline grades with new report cards.
So the headline grade.
My apologies.
Would be the one-word judgment.
Yeah. Sorry, I apologise. My brain must have turned to jelly. So yes, that is a good thing. Now, obviously, the devil will then be in the detail. What's going to be in the report card? Because I think what they're trying to do is they're trying to strike a balance between wanting to get rid of those kind of grades, give a report card which is probably more valid in the sense that it can say all of the good things and all of the bad things without having this like massive cliff edge or weighty judgment. But they're also really clear about that doesn't mean they're just going to let schools who are failing fail. And they've got this really rhetorical, ghastly line. Where was it? They said, we won't let any child fail or something along those lines. Where is it? God, it's really lovely. So I'm going to read it for you. Where's it gone? Fail. They say fail a lot, 10 times. Whatever it is, they're pretty punchy on that thing. So yeah, it's kind of I'm a bit so-so on that one, and I guess we'll just have to see how it plays out.
I want to ask you as well there, Adam, because that sort of tied in nicely with what we were discussing just before that, which was like curriculum and stuff. You said there that the knowledge-rich curriculum has been a good thing, or knowledge-rich over the last 10 years has been a good thing. Can you sort of, A, expand on that, and B, what do you think about Labour who've said that they want to include a creative or vocational subject within Progress 8 and Attainment 8. They've said that they want a curriculum that ensures young people leave school ready for work and life, building knowledge and skills.
Yeah, I'll get to that in just a second, if that's okay. I think it's a great question because I found that line. It says, listen to this is glorious. Working together, we will ensure report cards capture the breadth of school life, while retaining triggers for interventions where serious failure is identified, because Labour will never stand by as children have failed. I mean, look at that. That's glorious, isn't it? Labour will never stand by as children have failed. Absolute gangsters. Love it. Right. It's a great...
That was my sound effect of a medal.
Oh, wow. Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, should we try and do it in tandem? Here we go. Right. Labour will never stand by as children are failed.
There you go.
Brilliant. Right. Nonsense aside, so that's the stuff. There are a couple of things there that I think are good. The Ofsted thing, I think we'll have to see. There are some things here which are very much not good, and that ranges from the technical to the pedagogical to the I guess philosophical. Like technically, this is an absolutely dreadful document. It is borderline impossible to read. It is a total mess. There is basically no structure. There's inconsistent heading and subheading. There are links that are just completely missing. and like quite annoyingly so. Like, for example, in the bit about Oracy, which has been much discussed, it says Oracy's contribution to accelerating academic progress has been evidenced by the Education Endowment Foundation, and they reference 19. You go to 19 because I would quite like to see that evidence, and it says www.nfer.ac.uk. Now, the NFER is the organisation that deals with like teacher recruitment and retention, which is definitely not the Education Endowment Foundation. And even when you click on that link, it doesn't go anywhere. So, this is like technical stuff that is like really disappointing from what's supposed to be a headline document. The writing is appalling. There are grammatical errors. There's a really nice one that might have slipped some people by. It goes like this. So Labour will review bursaries to ensure the £181 million a year the government spends on incentivising people into teaching, listen carefully, is being best used to attract and critically to retrain teaching staff. You see that extra R in retrain? They mean retain, right? But retrain is like a valid word. And you could read that and think, oh, are we retraining teaching staff? Like, what's going on here? They have commas that don't make sense, sentences that are just complete nonsense. Where was it? So, yet the Tories have built a school system where inspection is both dreaded and ineffective, too often identifying challenges felt schools, but stemming from academy trusts. What? Identifying challenges felt schools. Are there schools made of felt? Like, this is complete nonsense. And there's stuff like this the whole way through.
Are you saying that worries you in general? Like that?
Yes, exactly. It's like it we should be able to just talk about the teachy type and the education-y type stuff, but like this is amateur hour, right? And they just need to do better. It's not good enough. And the thing that makes me super worried is that it reads like it was written by a committee, where it's bounced around from loads of different people. There's no one at the helm. There's no proper editor pulling the whole thing together, and there's no one's proofread it, right? It's clearly not been proofread, right? Which is super worrying.
Murray, I want to bring you in. What do you think? Do you agree with Adam on this? That it's appalling in that sense?
I mean, I'm not gonna fight back on the grammar and the footnotes, but I think I want to point out what it's for, which is to say what some of the things that Labour would do if they got into government. And I agree that documents should be of high standards, of course, and as teachers we wouldn't accept anything less. But ultimately, does it set out the principles and values on which the party would govern, and therefore the choices they would make, giving some examples? And I think overall it does that. And I think, fair points on the feedback. But I suppose if I was there, therefore the feedback could be the substance is, there's lots of great substance there, and I know that you've said that already. But just have a quick double check and a proofread. But I think ultimately that setting out the difference between Labour education policy and Conservative education policy, and where the priorities would be, i.e. with children with disadvantage, children on free school meals, who are disadvantaged by schools that are not successful, that where there is need to improve them. I think overall then it sets out what Labour would do.
Adam?
Yeah, I don't disagree that it sets out a stall. I think it's definitely, I'll get to soon. I think it's definitely light on concrete stuff, but and I appreciate the feedback about the like technical stuff is taken on board, but like it really does worry me. And there's stuff here like at the end in the data on the appendix, it's got this big headline, for example, that says progress has flatlined under the Conservatives, percentage of 19-year-olds with level 3 attainment. But then in the graph, if you go from 2010, the percentage bar at the top looks like it's about 57%. And then, it kind of is a bit flat and hovery, uppy, downy a bit. And then by 2021-22, it's up at what looks like about 64-65%. So it just really worries me because it's just technically dodgy, and I very much worry that if you want this to be something that's like super duper important, don't put it out until it's perfect, because people are going to read this stuff. And even though I'm looking at it and thinking, yeah, we've got some substance here, and we've got some substance that I agree with and some substance I don't agree with, I find it very difficult to get past the sort of, that kind of stuff. Can I move on to,
Adam,
some more substantive content?
Yes, I want to go back to what I asked you 5 minutes ago, which was on...
Yes, because I was going to get
to
that.
So you said the knowledge-rich curriculum has been a good thing. You said knowledge-rich has been a good thing over the last 10 years.
Yeah.
And I wanted to dig... Overall. And I wanted to dig into... what you meant by that, and also Labour saying they want a curriculum that ensures young people leave school ready for work and life, building knowledge and skills. And they also say about including a creative or vocational subject within Progress 8 and Attainment 8. I want to know your views on
that. So there's quite a lot there. I have absolutely no problem with the idea of including a creative or vocational option in Progress 8, provided that it's rigorous. So part of the reason why stuff like that isn't there is because I think for a long time a lot of these qualifications weren't considered particularly highly. So if you remember the old driving license thing, there was stuff that could count to school accountability measures that Gove and friends did not consider to be like important cultural treasures. I think there is a philosophical distinction between the Labour position here and certainly what we got used to under the Tories. So there is a lot here. It's not exclusively, but there is a lot here about preparation for work. There's a lot here about equipping people with the skills that enable them to adapt to change, and what employers have been asking for, and all of this preparation for work and work. And I think, look, it is an internally coherent and valid educational philosophy to say that the purpose of education is to prepare students for work. I think that is without a doubt part of the purpose of education, but there is a certain I do think it feels a bit lacking in this document in terms of some of the stuff that Gove and Gibb used to say about cultural treasures, and just the fact that this is our intellectual inheritance and it's our obligation to pass on from generation to generation and stuff like that. Like, it does resonate with me, not as the sole purpose of education, but certainly as part of it. And that kind of majesty, that kind of romance, doesn't really exist all that much within this document, which I think is a little bit missing, and for me lends to a more sterile picture of education. Like stuff like parents have complained that we don't teach students how to interview or how to budget. I mean, come on. Like, this is just so hackneyed. Can you imagine trying to teach 11 Step 5 how to budget? Like, it's just ridiculous. It's a skill that they won't, that some of them might need tomorrow and others of them might never need, and the ones that do need might not need for another 5 years. When people tell us that we need to learn how to fill out a tax return, right? I'm 32 years old. I filled out my first tax return 2 years ago. I mean, I don't need to learn this stuff when I'm 15 years old, and I can't imagine the boredom of teaching it. And teaching interview skills as well. I mean, this is a very dodgy business. Like, we don't really know whether or not interview skills and stuff like that can be taught or can be improved. So it's really dodgy. And the same applies to the stuff where they talk about the analytics, the problem solving, the creative, interpersonal skills. This stuff has been around for so long. And I am so yet to be convinced that it's possible to teach in any kind of transferable or generalizable fashion. I teach my kids how to be creative problem solvers in chemistry. Now, that doesn't mean in the slightest they're going to be creative problem solvers in absolutely anything else at all. It's just not the way the evidence points. And, there are tons of studies that try and look for this elusive, generalizable creativity or critical thinking that can be taught. And pretty much all of them come back that it can't. So I really do worry that we're heading into the kind of stuff that we used to have to do, where we're spending whole lessons teaching analysis or teaching evaluation, and it just doesn't work. And I'm actually, to tell you the truth, I'm actually bored of discussing it, because I think there are some things where there's room to give and there's room to have a good argument about. But until someone can explain to me how me teaching my students to creatively analyze the rates of reaction practical will improve their ability to be creative in any endeavor other than the rates of reaction practical, until someone can do that, I'm not discussing it, because it just bores me, and there's no Like there's no appreciation of the nitty-gritties of what it actually looks like on the ground. What am I supposed to do in the classroom? And until that stuff is really presented to me, and someone says, right, this is exactly what we want you to do in terms of teaching, problem solving, analysis, creativity. And someone says, and this is exactly the difference it will make in another domain. So it will be generalizable and transferable. It's just not worth discussing.
Is there an argument, though, that when it comes to the creative subjects, but also, I guess, the space for students? Because, I mean, there's one thing saying, okay, teaching creativity, that's one thing. There's another thing to say space for students to be creative within the curriculum.
Yeah, I already said.
For me, they're two separate issues, and I wondered whether
first things first. Yeah, they gave a little table. I can't remember what it was. I don't think I kept it. They gave a little table where they looked at the disadvantage gap for different subjects, and I think it was trying to make a different point than the one it actually made, because it turned out that actually a lot of students who are disadvantaged took music. A lot of students who are disadvantaged took art and design. There was basically no disadvantage gap for art and design, which was a bit weird given that they thought that was really important. But anyway, I don't have any problem whatsoever with students taking a creative subject. I think it would be fantastic if more students had the opportunity to take music. I think it would be more fantastic if more students had the opportunity to take design and technology. I took design and technology for GCSE. I think it's brilliant. I have no problem with it whatsoever. But it's worthy in and of itself. It's not worthy because it's going to make a kid more creative, right? It might make a kid better at D&T, but it's not going to make them more creative when it comes to, their job in, I don't know, in sales or customer service or hospitality or whatever it is. Just say, right, music is brilliant. We want students to be able to study music. Let them study music. I think that for me is the thing that's important.
There'll be those who would say, in a very sort of caricature way, and certainly I'm going to caricature it, but this idea of getting a knowledge organizer and drilling, knowledge through, sort of semi-rote learning and sort of like, oh, let's look at our knowledge points and let's review the knowledge points and learn the knowledge points and retrieve the knowledge points and whatever. There'll be those who will say, well, that's just dull. That is not, thinking about the way in which the acquisition or the availability of things like ChatGPT and other things to, yes, as we were saying earlier, you still need certain levels of knowledge to access a program like ChatGPT, but nevertheless, there are implications for the sort of acquisition and availability of knowledge and how significant different bits of knowledge are and so on.
Yeah, but I mean, these arguments aren't new because of ChatGPT. No, they were that as an example. They came around when Google came around. They came around when Encarta came around. They came around when Wikipedia came around.
Yeah, but I'm just saying that ChatGPT is way beyond anything that it's way beyond Google search. It's way beyond. I mean, it can ChatGPT can tutor someone technically if they're engaged enough in it. You know what I mean?
Well, I mean, to start with, it can't.
Mary, go on. I'll let Marie come in because Mary. Sorry, I keep.
That's all right.
Mary.
I was just going to say I agree about knowledge being domain specific. So I agree with you on that, Adam. And as a history teacher, I find that all the time. But I think there are some things that when I read the thing about interview skills and budgeting, I didn't think, oh my gosh, we're going to have to teach those. I thought, people always think schools aren't teaching these things, and we are. So our school stops at 16, and so when students go to college or sixth form, they all have to have an interview. So it's the least we can do to give them some practice at doing an interview, because they're going to have to go do one to get into their next school. And so I actually think it's quite a domain specific skill that if you don't do it first at school, then where would you do it? And I think another interesting point we haven't mentioned is about the 2-week work experience, which would be quite a change, I think, if it was nationally to have a compulsory 2-week work experience. I agree with you about the value of education, for the love of the subject and the knowledge and the joy of it, but obviously it's got to be practical as well. So I didn't think I was pleased it didn't have kind of going back to teaching skills of teamwork that we had got to at one point. So I think the balance is just about right.
Adam, I'll let you sort of.
Yeah, I mean, I think we'll just have to wait and see. I think part of the problem with documents like this is that it's not clear what is actually going to happen and what is part of a review. So they mention a curriculum and assessment review a few times, and I think if it is the case that we're talking, super minimalist position on this stuff, when we talk about budgeting, when we talk about interview skills, we're talking about helping kids get to college or helping kids get to university if they're sixth form, which again, yeah, it's something that's normal. It's something that we do. If they talk about, when we talk about using ChatGPT, well, maybe we're just talking like a couple of PSHE lessons or whatever. But if we, and the same thing for the problem solving and indeed stuff like the oracy. If by oracy, which, I don't know if you saw, there was a lot of chat online today about what exactly oracy means, but if by oracy they mean, teaching kids vocabulary explicitly, and using cold call to make sure they're responding when you ask them questions, then yeah, that's fine. But it could very easily turn into stuff that totally isn't there. So part of my frustration here is that I'm trying to look at the words and figure out a potential future direction. And there is one future direction where very little changes. And my bucket list of things that I want Labour to do with the curriculum and assessment, like, for example, reducing it by 20 to 30%, there is a world in which this document justifies that. But there's also a world in which this document does not justify that at all and starts doing really, really weird things and making me teach in a really, really weird way, which I remember from, when I was first training, and I very much do not want to go back to.
Mary, do you want to sort of come back on anything there?
Yeah,
any of your thoughts?
I agree that the obviously it's going to be how it looks in practicality. That is going to say whether it's successful or not. But I think it does take into account the kind of consensus that has built around the amount of knowledge that is helpful for children to learn. And there's lots of things I think we've learned about teaching, and I think that there's been lots more about codifying what's good in the classroom. And I think there will be more that Labour could do once in that allows that to be shared more broadly. But as you say, it will all be in the detail. But I think that starting point, and actually in the Keir Starmer speech about breaking the class ceiling and giving the opportunities that exist across the economic spectrum, is where it starts. And I think for me, that's the important bit of the principle, and making sure that then what's delivered is in line with that, so that we're not trying to teach skills that can't be taught in ways that can't be taught, but that we're just celebrating the subjects and allowing all children from all backgrounds to succeed in a wide range of different areas.
Yeah, totally. I'm 100% on board with stuff like that. And if for example this document had have only spoken about stuff like, all right, well, let's just technocratically, how are we going to make sure that every state school student has a maths teacher? How are we going to make sure that every state school can offer French and German and music to GCSE? I think all of those questions are, and the stuff about recruitment and retention, not retraining, but retaining teachers. I think all of that is super on point and super important. I think the technocratic stuff about, even the idea of that stuff to do with the super teachers, like how are we going to do that? I know some people have kicked up a fuss and said, well, we already have the maths and blah, blah, blah. Fine. But that's really fundamentally, it's a technocratic question. It's a philosophical stuff that super worries me, because the simple fact is this. There's a guy on Twitter called Ryan Dahl who's really interesting. And he uses two terms I think are really important. He talks about the difference between a domain elite and a domain expert. And specifically, he talks about education elites and the education experts. The education experts are people who really, really, really know stuff about education. And there are a number of them around. But they are not always the education elites, because education elites are the people who have a seat at the table, who are in the room where it happens, who are the guys who are sitting on the panels and writing the papers and being the people who are really driving policy. And they are not they sometimes are, but they are not always education experts. And for so long, these people who have been in charge have just given us a wealth of terrible ideas. And it all stems from these really dodgy philosophical positions that I see in this document. So like I said, could it be that this document doesn't end up being really retrograde, I guess is the right word? Yes, absolutely, it could be. And it will all depend on who's got Starmer's ear, because when it comes to the curriculum stuff, there's not enough meat to go on in here to really know what's going on. But if the guys with Starmer's ear are the same people that we've always had, then unfortunately this document will take us backwards.
I think it's a good case for having people from the front line, absolutely, talking to government if Labour gets in. I agree that it's important to have people with genuine expertise, because otherwise I agree you can't have people kind of making blue sky policy that don't understand and aren't experts. So I completely echo that, and I'm sure we could do more in the education world to kind of make those links, particularly with the Labour Party now, which hopefully is in a good position.
Is that Adam? Is that a particular comment about this report and the formulation of the Labour policy, or is that just a general comment about education?
It's both. So it's a general comment about education, that for decades the voices have been ones who just give these hackneyed ideological tropes that just go on and on and on and on. And within this document, you can hear their voices, right? You can hear that influence. And again, could it be that it's just to mollify them, to keep them quiet? Maybe. Could it be that the big curriculum and assessment reform that's promised in here will completely ignore them and will be taken up of people who understand the evidence and are trying to be practical and technocratic as opposed to ideological and philosophical? Yeah, it could well be, but it makes me very worried when I see some of this stuff that's going on here, because it just feeds straight into that one stream. And whilst it's true, like Mary said, that there is the emphasis on the knowledge rich stuff, it's a small part. In my reading, it's a small part.
I mean, the interesting bit, I guess, is this idea about, I mean, to take this a bit more radical, do we need to sort of really rethink the sort of hierarchy of curriculum subjects? Do you think that's a case to put across, that that maybe there's a time that we need to really sort of reassess why are subject hierarchies the way they are, or are you sort of happy with the way it's structured, as in core subjects and the in inverted commas the best 8 or the top 8?
I think it's very difficult to. It's a very philosophical discussion, yes, and there are lots of very, very legitimate positions to take. And this is where that balance is important. I'm a polytheist when it comes to the purpose of education, because I don't believe in a purpose of education. I believe in purposes. So, for example, I believe that art. I don't like on a fundamental level, like in an intrinsic level. Like, there's no reason to say whether or not art is more important than music or is more important than computing. But when you blend that into the heady mix of, right, well, but we also have to get these children jobs, and not just do we have to get these children jobs for their own sake, but like we have an economy that we need to look after. And if everyone finishes school having just studied, say, for example, music, and everyone wants to do careers in music, well, we're going to have a whole lot of pensioners in 20 years' time that we can't afford to upkeep. So that is part of the mix, and that, that's where this very dangerous, I don't know if dangerous is the right words, but like fervent. It's a hot pot of ideas, and I don't think there's like a straightforward route. Me personally, I think that the idea of putting maths is super important. I think it's totally reasonable. Putting English is super important is totally reasonable. Putting sciences one step below those, I think, is totally reasonable. And then I think opening it up becomes kind of fair game amongst any subject that's rigorous. Again, I don't want the driving license back. I don't go that far. It's not anarchy, but you know what I mean. I think what we've got at the moment, plus the addition of maybe saying put music into the progress 8 or whatever. I don't have or no, not Progress 8, into EBAC. I can't remember exactly. Yeah, EBAC or whatever it was.
Attainment 8, I think, is what they said.
Yeah, so to the end of one of the non-EBAC subjects included in pupils' progress in Attainment 8 should be creative or vocational. Yeah, like I like I said, I don't object to that too much, provided we have the teachers to deliver it.
Well, quite, and sort of the that was the angle I was taking with it is, are we too sort of traditional in the way the curriculum is set up at the moment? I don't know whether to include the term knowledge-rich curriculum in that or not, but, are we too traditional in our general approach to curriculum in this country?
Again, I don't know, because it's hard to know, because like in all the schools that the school that I work at currently, which is over 40% pupil premium, at GCSE, we offer art, we offer drama, we offer design and technology, we offer food technology, we offer health and social care, we offer all of these, we offer PE, we offer all of these things. So it's hard for me to, my personal bias is in there, and the evidence doesn't seem to suggest, I wish I could find this table again, but the evidence doesn't seem to suggest that there is actually a huge gap when it comes to, when it comes to...
While you're finding that, Adam, I'll read out a comment that Hannah sent in, and she says, the Cultural Learning Alliance new research shows that low-income families are 3 times more likely to have a degree if they study art. So I'm guessing Hannah is referring to if they study art at school at Key Stage 3, Key Stage 4, Key Stage 5, potentially. I don't know, but that's what the comment says.
But we'd have to look really carefully at the controls, because you also have, like, for example, if you take London, right, you've got lots of people who are disadvantaged in London, but because of economies of scale, most schools in London will also offer art, but they'll also have access to other opportunities. So the average Progress 8 in London is plus 0.3. Right, so you end up with a school with a student gets to choose art and gets to go to a school that is scoring above average just because it's in London. Whereas if you take that kid and you put them in rural Cumbria or whatever, and the school that they're going to doesn't have enough teachers, doesn't have support, can't put on art, they're going to have other problems as well. So it's not that straightforward, and that's part of the thing here, right? People will take a stat like that and then just say, right, well, we just need to offer art to everybody, but I don't think it quite works like that.
But I think ultimately what the policy is suggesting is a review, and I think having that review, having those voices around the table, it's time to have a curriculum and assessment review. I think, because we haven't had one for, is it about 10 years was the last one?
Over.
So it's due, and I think these conversations about philosophy and what education is for, and therefore which subjects should be part of the assessment and part of what is considered in assessment measures, I think should all be part of that review. And so I would say that it's saying the right thing. It's saying that we should have a review, and I think you're right to say who are those experts that we need to make sure are on that review, so that what is decided reflects the consensus about where there is consensus about recent research.
Listen, I want to. We're sort of running out of time to an extent, so what I'm going to do now is a really scatty and basic thing, which is essentially run through every single policy they've announced really briefly. And Adam and Mari, you can both say win or bin.
Nice.
Yep. So that's what we're doing. So here we go. 2 seconds. Let me get my magic list of all the policies up, and also silly sound effects as well. So it's win or bin are your options, and we're going to go through them all. So Adam, I'll start with you on these. So these are win or bin. £2,400 to teachers after 2 years of teaching.
Win.
Hang on, let me find the bloody sound effect.
Come on, man.
It's gone. Crying out loud.
Do you want me to do it?
Hang on, there it is. All right. Knowledge. Oh no, that's what you said. Next one. Putting a creative subject or vocational subject into Progress or Attainment 8. Win or bin?
If you can find the teachers, win.
The idea that every teacher should have QTS or have to get it to continue teaching. Win or bin? Adam?
Borderline win.
Reform of the early career framework. So they've said that
no comment. No comment. I've not delivered it. I've not delivered it. I'm not commenting on it.
Okay, fair enough. The idea of school improvement teams going into schools, framed by the media as the super teachers scheme.
Jury's out.
Okay, I haven't got.
I'm breaking your rules. I'm breaking your game.
You are
entirely,
breaking the rules.
Sorry about that.
If you had to choose win or bin, though, for the super teacher scheme, if you had to choose,
I think if it was in addition to what we already have, win.
And finally, Adam, the removing Ofsted one-word judgments and going to a scorecard or report system.
To the former, definite win. To the latter, jury's out.
Okay. I think I think you've got a generally positive slant on most of the things that Labour seem to have announced there. Mary, I'm gonna come to you now. Same thing.
Okay.
£2,400 to teachers after 2 years. A good idea, win or
definite a win.
This is a good one. I'm going to throw in something Adam said. Knowledge rich has been a great thing for the last 10 years.
I didn't say that.
You said something like that.
I said it's been a good thing, and then later I made sure to say overall a good thing.
Okay, so has knowledge rich been overall a good thing, Murray, in the last 10 years?
I think overall a good focus on knowledge is good, but what you have to learn for history GCSE is extraordinary and way more than you have to do in an IGCSE in a private school. Just saying.
That's the wrong sound effect. Sorry, that was locusts. There we go.
Frogs, I reckon.
I don't know what it was. Mary, next one. The putting creative or vocational subject into Progress Entertainment 8.
That's a win.
QTS for all teachers, regardless of, the ones who work in private schools or academies. All of them need to have QTS and get QTS.
We definitely need a qualified, professional, upskilled profession. So yes, definitely. Win.
Labour school improvement teams, i.e. super teachers.
Without the i.e. super teachers, it is a win.
Fine. Removing Ofsted one-word judgments and going to scorecards.
I'm going to say that's a win as well. I think that would be bad.
All right. Listen, to ask you both just before we go, your final... If someone from Labour is listening to this, and I will send it to them, they're not going to listen. But if Keir Starmer just woke up and thought, "Hey, I'm going to listen to an episode from Teachers Talk Radio this morning, and I'll choose this."
Tom,
one.
don't sell yourself short. There'll be some spad somewhere.
Yes.
Who'll be listening.
No, I actually believe that is a possibility. So, if I was to ask you both individually, what would be your message, your general? If you were to say a few things to them, the policy advisors from Labour who might be listening to this, who contributed to the document or whatever. Adam, I know you're going to say, please check your spelling, punctuation and grammar. But apart from that, what would be your overarching advice that you would give to them or your message to them? Adam, I'll start with you on this.
My overarching advice would be to go hardcore technocratic. Ditch loads of the philosophy, ditch loads of the kind of rethinky, blue sky type stuff. Look at what we've got. Look at how we can get a spanner out and improve things in a way that isn't an upheaval isn't crazy. The really boring stuff, like getting solar panels onto the roofs, letting schools rent out gym halls, reducing curriculum by just getting rid of a whole load of stuff, that kind of thing.
Okay. And Mary?
I'd say keep focusing on the early years, because that's where you're going to make the most difference, and do everything you can to get excellent teachers and subject specialists in front of children and keep them there.
It's been an absolute pleasure, and a massive thanks to Pearson MFL and also to the Happy Confident Company for supporting the show this evening and all our shows on Teachers Talk Radio at the moment. It's been a really, really interesting discussion. Johnny has just called in. Come on then, Johnny. You've called in while I was doing the wrap-up messages, but you know what? We're going to bring you in and hear what you have to say. Oh, he's gone. What the hell? Johnny was calling in. I thought he was going to throw a spanner in the works, but he's gone. So that I will go back to what I was saying, which is a massive thanks to everybody who's listened in live tonight. Huge numbers of people have been listening. Some people all the way through. Special shout to Georgia, who's listened to this from start to finish. So thank you very much, Georgia. It's been great. And Paul as well has been here. Paul Nicholas, right from the word go. So Paul, massive shout out to you, Georgia, to you too, and anybody else who's been here from the start to the bitter end. Huge thanks to Adam. Huge thanks to Mary. Huge thanks to Jamie, who was on earlier on as well. And this will be available to listen to as a podcast very soon via the Teachers Talk Radio website and all good podcast platforms. We will see you tomorrow from 6 p.m. or 7:30 p.m. onwards tomorrow night till 10 o'clock with 2 live shows. Thanks very much, everybody. Thanks for listening. See you again soon.
No worries. Bye, mate.
Bye. Thanks.
Cheers, Anna. Bye.
Bye-bye.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.